What has been happening with your practice?
Yeah. So business is good. Business is busy, and our practice is pretty full. I have my two full time clinicians that work with me, and they're getting to the point where they're about full as well. We're kind of dipping our toes into hiring another therapist to sort of round out our office. So, kind of like looking into that. We had an interview recently, so we'll kind of see where all of that pans out. Something kind of new and exciting that I'm exploring is I took a training on immigration evaluations, doing mental health assessment for folks who are seeking immigration status through various different types of immigration cases. And kind of research shows that um, having a mental health evaluation done in conjunction with your immigration request sort of it greatly increases the likelihood of that success. So I took this kind of extensive training in how to provide these, and going to start kind of marketing and getting prepared to be able to start offering those things as well.
That's super cool. Is that kind of like a one-off, two-off session thing, or is that a multi-week assessment that they have to go through?
Yeah, so it's usually like a two session assessment that's done, and then on the back end, on my end, there's like an extensive report write up that gets done. So yeah, the assessment with a client is typically like two sessions for about an hour each time.
Very cool.
Hmm.
Now I remember there was a another pretty extensive training program that you're going through, I think last year as well. Did you finish that? Have you integrated that into your practice at all yet?
Yeah, I did. I did do an extensive training last year that took about 6 months to complete, and um, that was for internal family systems, or we refer to it as IFS, right? Um, and yeah, it definitely has been a pretty integral piece of my clinical practice since that training. Um, it's a modality that I connect with really well, and it seems like clients get a lot out of it. Um, for me, it's a really like humanistic modality, which I appreciate.
I remember you told me a little bit about it way back when, but can you kind of refresh my memory? I remember it sounded really interesting.
Yeah. Um, so IFS, IFS talks about the different parts of us that serve different roles. Right. So we have parts of us that help us manage our day to day life, parts that like get us to work and pay our bills and, take our kids to the doctor and those things, right? Like help us to kind of do a lot of that executive functioning and be successful adults. We have other parts of us who show up when we have a crisis, and, like we'll have instances where it's like, man, I don't even know how I got through that or how I made decisions or how I did XYZ, right? Like these parts of us come in and they just play these roles for us to help us get through and help us to cope. We have other parts of us that um, we call them like exiled parts. So typically, these are parts of us that are holding wounds or holding trauma, oftentimes created in childhood, but not necessarily that. Um, and we call them exiled parts because like all of our other parts try to sort of keep that trauma holding part of us separate from our system, like away. And these protective parts do a really good job about kind of keeping that separate from us. But those exiled parts can pop up and cause a lot of chaos within our own life, unintentionally. But that part of us is like coming up and saying, like, "Hey, I have something to say to you. I have something that um, I need you to know, or I need you to understand, or I'm holding this pain, and we need to look at it, right?" Um, Richard Schwartz is the creator of IFS, and he has a really good book called No Bad Parts, where he talks about exactly that, right? Like that our parts of us they're all well intentioning and they all serve a function. It's just that these parts of us don't always understand the ways in which maybe they're not protecting us in the way that they think they are, or it's not functioning the way that it maybe once was, but they don't know how to do it any differently, right? And so, um, through using this IFS lens and kind of a particular protocol through IFS, we can learn to connect what we call like our inner self, our inner knowing. Our people call it lots of different things, but in IFS we call it self. So connecting self energy with all of these other parts of us. And by getting curious, by listening, by kind of getting on those parts level, we better understand what it is they need, want, what they're afraid of, where they came from. And over time, we can start to kind of upgrade these parts of us and ask them to maybe do their job in a different way that isn't causing harm, right? Yeah.
That that's really cool, and it sounds a lot like the whole idea of like having to wear different hats and putting on the different hats for different roles. And I really
Mm-hmm.
like that way of thinking because it almost kind of then makes it a lot easier to think in terms of like improving the parts of the system rather than, I think
Yeah.
a lot of times when we go through like counseling or like growth stuff, we get overwhelmed by thinking, oh my god, like I'm improving my whole person, or like this is like my all of me that's changing and stuff like that, when in reality it's like, oh no, it's just this certain role in this certain situation that we're focusing on right now, and once we
Yeah.
work through that we can go to the next one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's really powerful. It helps. um I think it feels less overwhelming, kind of like what you're saying. And um, I think we get to then keep the integrity of ourselves, right? Like we're not saying like you are so wounded, you're doing all these horrible things, like you. We're saying like your core self is calm, compassionate, curious, all of these things, right? But you have these other parts of you that are showing up and functioning and doing a really good job, just maybe not in the way that you now want them to. It's not serving you in the same way, right? An analogy that I use with like parts and self is if self is the sun shining bright in the sky, right? Parts are like clouds, and sometimes like though it'll be like partly cloudy, right? Your part is still there, but you're still shining through, and the part is just there to help filter out some, right? And other times you're completely blocked out, right? There's no light shining through. We're so overcast. But what we can do using IFS is to ask that cloud to like sit next to you, that like, hey, I still want you to protect me, to guide me, to help me, to show up for me. I just want to continue to be like in the driver's seat, right? I want myself to be the driver here. Um, so like an example of this would be maybe, you know, um, somebody who maybe feels kind of emotionally reactive, right? So maybe in a relationship, and um, you know, your partner A and partner B says something mean or sassy or something, and partner A retreats, right? They run away. They say, okay, I'm out. I'm done. I'm escaping. And that's a protective part, right? So that part of you that says, well, the safest thing for us to do is to run away, not engage, is protective. So we get curious about that part. Like, what is the part afraid will happen if you stay, if you engage? Where did that part come from? What's your earliest memory of that part existing for you? What was that part told about how to handle conflict? So we get really curious about it, so that in situations over time we can more from self centered evaluate like what the best response is, right? Yeah. um my doorbell just went off. I have landscapers here right now.
Mm.
um I need to go grab that.
Yeah, go run and take care of that. I'll be
Okay,
back.
I'll be right back. Sorry.
No worries.
Okay. Yeah. So,
I really like how the way you kind of look at it, or the way this kind of frames it, almost like separates like that identity part of you from those roles. You know, because I
mhm.
know that's always like a big problem too, is like that whole idea of shedding old identities. And this way it feels more like you're still like able to retain your identity. You're just like retraining a role that you have within that identity.
Right. I mean, identifying what is no longer serving us, right? That our parts of us were created for a reason, and in in a way they've protected us, right? And so as we age and hopefully as we grow, as we heal, um, our identity can remain the same, but we can ask our parts to show up differently. And that's more about how we develop and how we grow, how we change, is by identifying the things that are no longer serving us and changing that.
How has this changed the way you work with your clients and like interacted with them or like integrated into your practice?
Um, that's a good question. I think that I kind of naturally, without knowing, leaned towards an IFS model. Um, it very much just kind of aligns with my idea of what it means to be a human in general. And even from like my own life experience, being able to identify different parts of me and parts of me that aren't working or haven't worked for a while, or they're having unforeseen consequences. Um, and so I think I've always sort of naturally leaned this way, but having more um, training and education to be able to better articulate um, has been really helpful, and also to have the specific kind of protocol and modality to lean on. So even beyond having the words, but having a well researched outline for kind of processing and working through these different parts. So that's been a real asset, I think, to my practice, to my clients. Yeah.
That's really cool. Since taking the train, have you been able to kind of instill some of these practices and values like into your team more, do trains with them so that they can start using some of these with their clients too?
Yeah. So I haven't like specifically offered, this training to my, not that, I mean, they could choose to do it if they wanted to. I can't provide the training since I'm, just new at it, but it is something that I talk a lot about. And in supervision, I use IFS a lot. And even when we're talking about our own personal struggles, or we're, you know, having difficulty with a client or that kind of thing, I use IFS a lot when I talk to my team and identifying the parts of them that are showing up. And, um, I think this is a common theme with therapists of having, and probably just humans in general, but having imposter syndrome, right? And so for all of us, when that pops up, like identifying that as a part of us, like, and getting curious. So yeah, I definitely use it in my practice with my staff, as well as with my clients.
It sounds like it's those philosophies are just kind of ingrained and intertwined with the whole like Purple Lotus brand and philosophy with what you're building with your clinic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. Um, we all have things that happen to us in life that we've had no control over, that aren't our fault. And through that, we have developed parts of us, we've developed coping mechanisms, survival mechanisms to get through that. And it is my philosophy 100% that we cope the best way we know how until we learn a different way. And that doesn't deserve shame, guilt, blame. We deserve to give that those parts of us compassion and thanks for getting us to where we are, right? And so a huge philosophy for Purple Lotus is the focus on growth and moving through the muck and mud that life can be sometimes and trauma can be sometimes, so that we can kind of get to the surface and figure out what like blooming is, to be cliche, but like what blooming and blossoming and being kind of in our self energy looks like. Um, it's a process, it's a road, and IFS definitely helps me get people through the mucky parts. Um, yeah.
What made you pick the Lotus?
Yeah, kind of touching on what I was just saying, right? So, the way the lotus blooms is a seed falls to the bottom of a pond and, down deep in the muck, in the dirt. And in order for it to start to grow, the sun has to hit the water and penetrate down through the water and through the muck and the mud. And the seed is attracted to that and it grows up through all of that to the surface. And then once it gets to that surface, we see a beautiful flower that's blossomed, right? And for me, that is so like representing of my own growth through my own trauma. It's representing of what I've seen of other trauma survivors that I work with. Is we got to get through all of that stuff underneath, right? And I feel like my job as a therapist is to sort of be that like light at the top, encouraging the growth, right? Like I can't do it for them. I can't dig them out and scoop them up, but I can be the light at the top, encouraging and providing resources and its support and validation and all of the things, so that they can work their way up towards the surface and figure out again what blooming, blossoming kind of looks like to them. But yeah, the process of how the lotus grows is, really why I chose it.
It really sounds a lot like what you said earlier about even on your most overcast days, those rays of sun can still like penetrate through the clouds deep down in and help you
Mm-hmm.
grow.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Which I think that's, a powerful thing to be said that um, even through the darkest days, growth is still possible. Healing is still possible. And it's not always going to be a bright, beautiful, sunny day that helps us to reach that growth. We do have to deal with the cloudy days and the hard days and the dark days. Um, but I think having a really good therapist definitely helps that process. Yeah.
What would you say to someone who is kind of early on in that growth journey and hasn't had a chance to have a therapist yet or hasn't found the right therapist for them?
Yeah. Um, well, to the like haven't found a right therapist for them. Yeah, I just want to like validate that it's hard, right? It's really hard. And I think there's this perception that the first person you pick is like supposed to be it, or it is it, or you feel bad if it's not it, they're not it. And um, this is silly, right? But like if you go to a place to get your hair cut and it's a bad haircut, you don't just stop getting haircuts. You just find somebody else, right? You find somebody who does what you want them to do. And therapists are the same thing. That if that person does not fit what you need, they don't provide what you need, there's not a good rapport. Hell, if you just walk in and the vibe is off, like that's okay. Um, Try again though. Try again. And I recognize, right, how hard that is because we walk in and we're so vulnerable and this person is asking us all of these personal questions and to think about having to go through that again, like, oh, that's hard. Um, but try again because you're worth it. You're worth the healing. You're worth it's not because something's wrong with you, but it's because you deserve healing, you deserve growth, you deserve happiness, right? So um, keep trying. Find somebody who's going to support you in the way that you need or want.
What about for someone who's not quite ready to talk to a therapist yet or a counselor yet?
Mhm. That's valid too. That's absolutely valid too. Um, what would I say to that person? That's a good question. Um, I think that there are a lot of still really good resources that are out there. We live in a day and age where many resources are right at the tip, right at our fingertips. Um, I would be careful. I would be careful with what resources we're using, right? So make sure you're paying attention to who's writing that, who's writing the thing you're reading, what are their credentials, what background do they have, right? So we're consuming things that are ethical, that are research based, that kind of thing. But there are a lot of really good podcasts that are led by some phenomenal therapists. I would start there. That feels digestible to a lot of people. I'm not ready to go and share my personal story with somebody, but it's helpful to hear other people's stories, or it's helpful to hear the research, or it's helpful to hear resources from somebody who is trained, a therapist. Um, that's a really good place to start. Reading books is a really good place to start. Again, making sure you're paying attention to where you're getting those resources from. Um, but if you're not ready to open up, there's a whole vast uh, resource library out there for you.
You said something I think is incredibly important that I want to go deeper on is the credibility piece,
Yeah.
especially in this, you know, content overload world where especially in kind of the mental health, how to live a good life space, there are so many different people with opinions based on, you know, their own unique circumstances, which might not apply to everybody, but they say it with such conviction, it sounds so right that it's easy to fall into those traps. So,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that people can kind of look for or be on the lookout for that shows this person is actually credible and talking about things that are based in fact and reality and not just hopes and dreams and delusions?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think um, if somebody can present you with research, with numbers they can back up, or statistics they can back up, or to say, like, hey, we've been studying this phenomenon, we've been studying IFS and its effectiveness for this amount of time, right? Like, if somebody can say that to you, um, and you can then go look that up and find that evidence, like that's a really good place to start. Using like credible websites that again are research based, that are um, theory based, that I think, like, I, I don't want to diminish the importance of people's like self accounting to things, right? Hearing and sharing stories is a really integral part of human connectedness, of validation, of and it's an important part of healing for a lot of people as well. That's why we have support groups for things, right? Um, and but it's not, we have to be careful because, like you said, not everybody's experience is the same, and what works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for everybody, nor is it healthy for everybody, depending on what's going on, right? This is why it's so important to have a professional who can do an assessment and say, like, hey, yeah, you're dealing with, X diagnosis. Um, and so maybe we don't take this approach to your healing, or maybe we do take this approach to this healing, or here's the gold standard for, X, Y, and Z. That's why it's so helpful to have a professional who can help guide you. Um, and storytelling and sharing of personal stories are really great, but it's, um, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm having a brain fart.
No worries.
Um, it's anecdotal. Anecdotal. Is that right? Is that the word I'm looking for?
Anecdote,
Anecdotal.
anecdotal,
Anecdotal.
anecdotal.
Whatever that is, right? Um,
Words.
words are hard. Yeah. So it's. I don't know. I got lost on what your question was, but
No, that was fantastic.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Kind of like at the end with the anecdotal parts, like they can be good reference points and maybe guideposts along your path to kind of help show that you are going in the right direction or right, or
Mhm.
at least a direction where others have been and found success. Um, but like you said, having that guide of someone who is trained or has the
Mhm.
data or things like that, and
Mhm.
using that more as your map, um, to guide you, as you say.
Right.
Um, with that, like, have you found, or do you use it all in like your practice when working with clients? Like some of those resources, like maybe you have a session with something like, oh, this podcast or this YouTube video that I watched would be, something I think you would benefit. Like, have you been able to kind of help use that greater content library to benefit your own practice and help your clients out?
Yeah, I do. I do that quite often, in fact. I am not an expert on everything, nor do I have right. I'm with my client for an hour, right? And so we don't have the time necessarily to go over everything in such extensive whatever. So the work is done outside of my office mostly. Um, and by providing those resources, it helps clients to continue to do that work. Um, but I'm providing them with resources that that I personally trust, that I've vetted, that I understand where the content is coming from, And I still encourage my clients to do that themselves as well. Like, I'm providing you this resource. Please do your research. Please make sure this feels good to you. But yeah, I use podcasts, books, social media posts sometimes, right? Even TikToks on occasion, right? Like, I said, this was really great. This was really enlightening, or here's a resource I think could be helpful. In fact, I did that with a client yesterday, who was having some intimacy issues, and it was a really great intimacy podcast. I was like, go check this out.
I think that's such a cool thing about the world we live in with like the proliferation of video content with all the social media and YouTube and stuff like that. And that's like one of the ways in which we can use it to have like more positive effects on our lives when we have those
Mhm.
trusted resources and experts that can kind of point us into different directions to say, hey, like if you want to go deeper on this, here's another expert who has spent their whole career on this one topic, and now you
Mhm.
can benefit from that as well,
Mhm.
and then we can come talk about it more in our next session.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's just so cool. I think so many content creators and people forget about that aspect of their content creation when they're making things, because you even mentioned like, you know, as a professional therapist, you sometimes see people's TikTok videos that are like, oh my god, this would definitely help my client. You know, at the very least, sometimes just know that, hey, we're not alone in what we're going through, or someone else has struggled with this too and has come out of it. So like, here,
Mhm.
check this out, and that can be so hugely beneficial in a very like expansive way for, you know, all that those times outside of that actual like 1 hour that you get with them.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with you. And what I appreciate about this type of media too is maybe it's not like new information to me, but somebody says something in a way that I haven't thought about before, or like they give me verbiage, that I'm like, yeah, like that's the point. Like, that's such a better way of explaining that than I've been explaining it. So, like, let me use that language, or let me guide a client to this resource because they're nailing it on the head, right? Again, like, I'm not an expert in everything. I'm not perfect, and there are definitely people who do things differently than I do that maybe connects with a certain client. And it's my job as a therapist to really understand what my client is going to connect with and try to provide resources in a way that they're going to understand, that they're going to welcome in, that they're going to accept. And sometimes that looks like, hey, go check out this guy because they said it better than I did, right?
Yeah, that's such a great point. And something, again, a lot of people miss is like we all kind of take messages in differently and we respond to different messages in different ways people say things,
Mhm.
more or less. And it doesn't make any message more or less valid. And also, I think that gives kind of credibility to people like, yeah, just because it's been said doesn't mean the way that you say it
Mhm.
shouldn't be said too, because you never know who it's going to resonate with more.
Exactly.
And like you said, it helps out your clients even more because like now again you can be more of this guide to say like, hey, that topic that we talked about here, like this might resonate with you more. Check that out, and they're like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, now I get it.
Mhm.
And you're able to be way more effective in everything you do and help your clients out even more. That's super cool.
Yeah, yeah, it is really cool. Great.
I like it. Hmm. You said you had a client at one.
Yeah, I do have
H-
at one. Mhm.
How long do you need to get ready for them?
Um, about 10 minutes.
Okay. We can kind of wrap up then. I think that was a really fun conversation. It's super cool to hear more about the IFS stuff because I
Mhm.
remember you mentioned, I think it was like last summer or the summer before. I don't,
Yeah,
time
it
is,
was last summer. Mhm. Yeah, I know. It's crazy. Or maybe it was like, well, yeah, anyway. Yeah, it's crazy. That training was intense.
mm-hmm.
In like the best way possible, but like really intense. But it's really changed my practice and given me a lot more skill to be able to work with clients. My specialty being with trauma, but it helps me with all of my clients. So
That's
Yeah.
super cool. And
Mhm.
super cool like that you continue to grow and build your skill sets and things like that. I mean, that's the most awesome thing about being an entrepreneur and having your own business is that you can
Mhm.
add those skill sets and see it like directly benefit, both the people that you help and yourself, and your business grows and becomes
Right.
more of what you want it to be and you enjoy it more and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff.
Mhm. Yeah. I enjoy growth and development. I get bored if I'm stagnant or I'm doing the same thing for too long. And so I'm always like looking for things to learn or ways to shift or adapt. And I really liked that about being an entrepreneur is I have the freedom to do that. Right, like this is why I'm getting really curious about the immigration evaluation stuff because um, I want to kind of shift away from doing a little bit less, or I want to do a little bit less like direct long term clinical care because it leads to just crazy burnout in this field. But doing immigration assessments because it's 2 hours of contact with that client and then the rest is really admin work, like there's less of that, right? So I can sort of diversify my contact with clients and I'm craving that right now.
Yeah, and that's super cool that, like with owning your own business, it gives you the freedom to do that so you can avoid that burnout and then work with a few clients better, more, and help them more and provide more because you are energized and excited to work with those people while still
Yep.
having that other source in your business to, give you the freedom to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's super exciting. I am glad that you are kind of moving that direction and kind of pursuing new things in that way too. That's
Thanks.
super exciting and I'm sure scary as well and
Yeah.
better problems, right?
Right. Upgraded problems. Yeah. I will
That's
forever
awesome.
remember that. So it's great.
So what did you think of this? Was this kind of fun, not terrifying?
Yeah, no, not terrifying. I think having a conversation makes it feel better, right? Like just feels like I'm having a conversation with you and it's on a topic that I'm comfortable with, that I know about, right? That um I'm not uncomfortable talking about. So yeah, actually not really feeling anxious about it.
Awesome. You sounded
Yeah.
great. I mean, you had really great points. You didn't, like it flowed. You didn't meander or anything like that. You sounded very comfortable, authentic,
Mm.
very genuine. So you
No,
did
that's good.
fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's basically kind of what I'm trying to do with this. And I think what I've landed on, because like I was trying to sell it as like a product, because I don't really want to do like client work either. I've kind of
Mhm.
reached that similar sort of burnout with like the ongoing stuff. You just get too deep
Yeah.
into someone's business. Um, so I want to create like a community where I just facilitate people to have conversations like this, like just different entrepreneurs, coaches, business owners, stuff like that, so that
Mhm.
you're talking to different people with similar interests and all kind of creating content together, and then you get a wider variety of conversations. You get a chance to like talk to new people and build your network, and I think it'd create a stronger community because you're actually hopping on calls like this and having conversations like this rather than like
Mhm.
a normal group or forum where it's like a couple posts here and there and you might comment once in a while and then it's just like forget about it.
Mhm. Mhm.
um so I'm gonna do it as like a 5-day challenge where like you do 5 conversations 5 days in a row just to kind of get over like that fear of it and just like jump in. And then also too, you have like this nice backlog of conversations that you can turn into little social media clips. I've got a pretty simple process using a few AI tools where you basically just upload the videos and it creates the clips for you, and gonna
Mhm.
show people how to do that.
Mhm.
um, and then like each time I do a challenge, I'm gonna target like different communities, like coaches first, and then maybe a different type of business owner or service
Mhm.
provider or therapist or things like that. So like
Mhm.
like-minded people can come in together and talk
Yeah.
together first, and then they get introduced and like put into like the bigger community with other people and can kind of keep
Mhm.
expanding those conversations and networks.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the big idea I'm playing with and working on launching.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like that. I think it's a really unique, different kind of approach to content creation and marketing. And yeah, it's cool. It's really cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, the big
Yeah.
hypothesis I'm kind of working off is I see more and more like the big people kind of taking like center stage for attention as far
Hmm.
as like influencers go are largely doing so on platforms based around like having conversations, interviewing people, you know.
Yeah.
I know like a lot of content that I'm been trending towards is just different business owners and people in different areas that like I'm interested in, like interviewing other experts.
Hmm.
Um, and then they turn those into all their social media clips. So
Hmm.
it's kind of based
Hmm.
around like the whole trend going towards that. And this is a way for people to do that without having to like hire a VA or an agency or something like that to like try to get on podcasts and build their own podcasts and do all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I've seen that shift too of just people sitting around and talking, and that's the media. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's like the news kind of media that we always crave, where it's like it always
Mm-hmm.
cuts off in sound bites or like right when a conversation is starting to get good because that's all the time we have, folks. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
like these can just be conversations that flow wherever they want to, and could be a half hour, could be 2 hours, or whatever
Right.
it needs to be, and goes wherever it needs to go, and it just ends up being a more authentic and interesting conversation that way.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me. I like that.
Cool.
Good
Cool.
for you.
Awesome. Well, great. I will let you go and get prepped for your next call then. I'll send
Mhm.
this through all of my stuff in the next couple days. I'll send you over a bunch of clips of you sounding awesome and cool that you can share with your clients and people.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate that. It was good
Yeah.
to catch up with
Uh,
you.
Yeah, good catch up with you. Appreciate you hopping on with me. I'm gonna be in the Oshkosh area the weekend of June 14th. I have to finish painting a door for my mom's friend, but don't really have other plans outside of
Okay.
that.
Okay.
So if you're free, I can bump up to Appleton. We can hang out.
Yeah, absolutely. The 15th is Jason's birthday, but he's gonna be 20, so I don't know. I don't know what he's gonna want to do, if anything. But yeah, we could definitely find some time that weekend to get
Sweet.
together.
Yeah, I'll
So
probably be driving down sometime Friday and then going back sometime Sunday. So
okay,
any day
cool.
will work out.
Okay, cool. Sounds
Awesome.
good. I
I'll
love
talk to
that.
you later, Katie. Have fun.
All right. Have a good day.